let's start with the reporting on Michael Brown's autopsy. MSNBC host Lawrence O'Donnell went off last Wednesday night on the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's approach to reporting on the medical examiner's findings. The initial story, published midday Wednesday and then in Thursday's print editions, led to a flood of stories in other papers across the country that seemed to affirm Officer Darren Wilson's account of that day.
The Washington Post did not include an additional quote from the doctor that appeared in the Post-Dispatch. Quote, "If he has his hand near the gun when it goes off, he's going for the officer's gun." When I read those quotes in the Post-Dispatch, I was shocked by how far they reached beyond the facts of the autopsy. So I immediately invited Dr. Melinek on this program last night, which she agreed to do. And on the phone with our producer before the show, she immediately disowned those shocking quotes, didn't deny them. She said she was taken out of context, which is exactly what she said about those quotes on this program last night when I asked her about them at exactly the moment when the Washington Post pressers were running and locking those quotes into ink in this morning's paper. Now, I'm sure Dr. Melinek would have told the Washington Post the same thing about those quotes if either of the two reporters working on that false front-page story had bothered to call her.
Yesterday, the Post-Dispatch added an editor's note to that story from last week, indicating that Dr. Melinek contacted the paper seeking to clarify her statements. When the doctor had claimed that her comments were taken out of context, as she says often can happen during long interviews, and she gave her opinion, but said she was making it clear that there are different interpretations possible based on what's in an autopsy result.
Well, so first of all, it's not surprising for a source when they become part of a firestorm to suddenly say, oh, you took me out of context, or what I really meant to say was, the Post-Dispatch has said it stood by its reporting. You heard Lawrence O'Donnell saying she didn't deny she said those things. I'm not saying that other media didn't take what the Post-Dispatch reported and shorthand it into the autopsy report defends the police officer's point of view. But that's not what the Post-Dispatch reported. What they reported is what she said.
I mean, the other issue here, I think, or maybe a larger issue here, is that this goes back to the partisan media that we've been talking about time and time again. And the public needs to be aware that you have the Post-Dispatch, which is trying to basically present the story as it is given to them, and then you have MSNBC, which has another narrative, that spin that it's going to put on it, as Fox News does, as CNN and others do. So, I mean, when you start talking about the actual news story as opposed to the talking heads on the other side, you're going to get a different narrative, and I think this is a part of that.
What would be really interesting to know is whether or not the Post-Dispatch recorded the interview with Dr. Melinek. If they didn't, they probably should have. If they did, my guess that might be behind why they're sticking by their story, because they believe that what she said is what she said. I mean, the other thing that interests me about this, though, is this whole notion of what's our responsibility when somebody wants to leak to us part of the information in a controversial story like this? The Post-Dispatch made it clear the grand jury did not leak this information to them. Somebody else did. But clearly it was only part of the testimony and the evidence that was presented to the grand jury. It'd be nice if we were going to have not selective leaking, but we could actually understand everything that went before the grand jury.
And I mean, that's a very important point to make there, Mike, is that you're only getting part of the story. And that part of the story is going to feed into a narrative that one side or the other is basically trying to put out there before the public. And in the case of this autopsy and what her comments were, that sort of works in with the whole narrative that Darren Wilson supporters want, and which goes against what some of the Michael Brown supporters want. No one's talking about when are we going to get the full story. And that's the key. What's the full story here of the information as it was presented to the grand jury? We won't know that until the grand jury comes back with either a no bill or an indictment.
And we might not know the whole story after that. I mean, one of the things that worries me is this notion that, well, the media are supposedly helping to prepare, as is law enforcement, prepare the community for the likelihood that he's not going to be indicted. Now, I can understand why law enforcement might have that as a goal.
or Governor Jay Nixon.
Right.
We talked a little bit last week
And others,
about the creation
I don't know that it's the
commission.
media's responsibility to be selectively, carrying selective leaks in print because they're worried about preparing the community for this or that outcome.
But the thing about it is the media has always covered stories like this from information gathered from various sources. It could be leaks, it could be official, it could be from wherever. So this isn't anything new. I think one of the differences in this is that there are various narratives that are playing out there on an issue that's much larger. And the issue is the criminal justice system and its relationship to African Americans. Right. And that, I think, is the overarching narrative that really needs to be discussed. And it's hard to do that when you have leaks falling in and out on stories and you don't have the full picture.